Okay, so hold on. Until Omo comes back, I'll just put this down here. Hello everyone. My name is Ronnie, and today I'm going to be presenting on eDemocracy, or digital democracy. I'm going to go over some trends in Europe. A lot has been happening in Europe related to this, and also Australia and some in Argentina are some of the leaders in this particular field. Now, basically, I have to kill a little bit of time because I have a cool video that I wanted to show everyone at the very beginning of this presentation. I'm learning to be a teacher, and they're telling me in teaching school that you got to have a hook for the kids at the beginning of your lesson, so that way it keeps their attention. So I got a hook here, and it's real good, but without an audio component, it's just going to fall flat. So, but fun fact, because we're going to be looking at that very soon. Estonia is actually one of the leading internet democracies in the world. They've been doing online voting, internet voting, since 2005. I had to look up where Estonia was, but it's right next to Russia and Ukraine and whatnot, and Norway, and sort of near those Scandinavian countries as well. But yeah, we're gonna see a video from the PM of Estonia, showing how easy it is for them to vote in their last elections in the 2015 elections, because they have a whole system. I mean, basically, you can vote from your home, from your computer, and you can authenticate from your mobile device. You know, so there's a lot of different nuances to the security issues involved in that kind of process, but we'll touch on those as we go along. So, got the Oxford. Awesome. Okay. All right, let's test her out. Oh, okay. Sorry. Okay, so that was a quick 2-minute video of how quick and easy it is to vote in Estonia now. I don't know if you can summon to mind your memories of the last time you went to go vote and take an approximation of how many minutes it took you to complete that process, from getting there to waiting to showing your ID to polling and then finally voting and then leaving. You got it? So this is just an advertisement. Yeah, I'll continue to need it. Okay. So that was just an advertisement for the country, just showing off its software, and then we'll return to this in a little bit. First, I want to go over some concepts. So first concept is CSCW, or Computer Supported Cooperative Work. It's basically just a generic term talking about combining how people work in groups, the psychology of how people work in groups, and computer technology, computer networking, hardware, software, and all the rest of it. But CSCW is the larger complex of how real people interact with these things. Sometimes it's a steep learning curve. Sometimes the design of the page is confusing and it's hard to get work done. So it's not just the technical aspects of it. Groupware is concerned with basically just those applications. So that's a sort of a subdivision of CSCW, is just the software components. eDemocracy, which is what I'm going to be talking about today, is just a combination of the words electronic and democracy, or internet democracy, and all it is purporting to stand for is that it incorporates 21st century information and communications technology to promote democracy. E-participation, sort of a subcategory within eDemocracy, is the idea of using information and communications technology to participate in the process of governing. So to participate in the process of forming a policy, or in the process of voting for a particular policy. Liquid democracy is something that we're going to be looking at in some of these softwares. It's turning to be a core concept in for some of these applications. And what it's doing is it's reframing how we think about democracy. So a lot of the times we think about representative democracy. What the softwares are allowing us to do is branch out more of that responsibility to more of the delegates. So it allows, or it can allow, more people to weigh in and make decisions that would normally be done by delegates, people, or representatives, the people that we put in positions to make those decisions. And then direct democracy is the old sort of Athenian idea of just everyone comes together and they all weigh in on each and every decision. Liquid democracy is slightly different. The way that it's utilized with some softwares, you can choose to give over your vote to somebody else. You can say, I'm not good at computer science. I'm not good at environmentally complex science-related questions. So I'm going to give that to this scientist that I know and let them make this decision. But the next decision, I'm going to weigh in on. So that's the liquid sort of idea of liquid democracy. You can go back and forth. Who's using CSCW? Countries like Estonia, we just saw. Iceland is also another famous case. They crowdsourced or attempted to crowdsource their constitution in 2009. Municipalities like Tuscany and Geneva, we'll get into that a little bit later. Universities, Cornell, UMass, there's a lot of universities, honestly, that are doing this. Companies, Facebook, Google Docs, Facebook groups, if anybody's in a Facebook group, it's basically the same thing. It's computer-supported cooperative work. You might get into a Facebook group, so that way you're updated about whatever event that might be coming up, or you're going to talk about some sort of issue within the group. So that's all. These are all examples of computer-supported cooperative work. Google Docs is also another good example of that. You can have multiple people editing a document at the same time. Social movements, the Arab Spring and Occupy employed a lot of social media, but also employed some of these softwares that we're going to be talking about as well to deliberate and make decisions as groups. My personal experience with eDemocracy in general, starting in 2011 with Occupy Austin. I was a member of Occupy Austin. That's a picture one of our general assemblies, one of our early general assemblies, and that's not everyone in there. So one of the issues that happened with Occupy right away is that we realized that we were coming to a grinding halt at every one of these GAs because it took so long to transpire, for people to be heard and for decisions to happen. So there was an immediate need for some sort of electronic solution to that. Open Assembly here was one of these software developers that was trying to basically create online general assemblies for the Occupy movement. That software is no longer in use, but that was one attempt. And then there was InterOccupy, which was a networking of locations internationally. It was international and it was national. There'd be a lot of conference calls, but then there was also an element of trying to get people on the same page and get people to agree on certain actions or proposals and that sort of thing. And so there was a need for a system to try and do that across states and across countries. Continuing, article.v.org or article5.org. In 2012, this came right out of my experience with Occupy. On one of our InterOccupy conference calls, I was talking with people around the nation, and there was some folks in that call who brought up the idea of an Article 5 constitutional convention. And the specifics of that are kind of, there's a lot of specifics to that, but basically if 3/5 of the states want a constitutional convention, we're supposed to have one. Now, articlev.org set up a social networking site to try and handle that process. There's a number of lawyers and other kind of legal heads in the group, and they believed that it was just a matter of trying to contact the right people in the government right now to trigger one of these events. So they wanted to prepare and get ready for it to happen because they thought it was going to happen kind of soon. So that's what they were trying to do. They were doing this social networking site simply to facilitate this convention. In 2013, I was involved in what was happening out at the Capitol with the abortion legislation, and there was a group called Rise Up Texas that was involved sort of in the grassroots on that. And we used a lot of social media. We used a lot of Google Docs and spreadsheets to keep contacts and stuff in order. There was some more advanced kind of media techniques of doing documentary type coverage and then putting that out for people to be aware of. And then we also tried to use the Erasis software, which is a software out of Italy, to do our in-house proposals for what we wanted to do as a group moving forward. So there was that. And then lastly, again, making it kind of broad, most recently, Save RGB from LNG. The FERC comments are one example of computer-supported cooperative work that's already set up by the government. You can go to this website, or this Facebook event will take you to the website, and you can submit comments. So there's one way that the government already interacts with us in electronic ways. We're using a software called FreedCamp as well, which is another group software that allows you to have a calendar and documents and a discussion, but it doesn't have any of these voting elements or discussion or debate elements like some of the other softwares. It's kind of basic. And then also social media. Okay, so that sort of introduction. Now we're going to move on to a brief history of the subject. Now I'm going to start in 1938 with George Gallup and his sampling referendum. That's a picture of George looking really happy, and that's like a modern Gallup poll. Here's a quote from George from 1938. The New England town meeting has, in a sense, been restored. The wide distribution of daily newspapers, reporting the views of statesmen on issues of the day, the most universal ownership of radios, which bring the whole nation within the hearing of any voice, and now the advent of the sampling referendum, which provides a means of determining quickly the responses of the public to debate on issues of the day, have in effect created a town hall meeting on a national scale. So the sampling referendum, what he's talking about is basically his innovations in polling and their accuracy. So he thought that this was going to bring about some sort of sampling, what he called the sampling referendum, to where people in the government would be made aware of the opinions of the public in such a quick way that it would lead to these sorts of direct changes, that they would understand the pulse of the nation, the nation would be informed by newspapers and radio, this new technology, and so now you have the ability to create this new town hall space. Okay, Project Cybersyn. So this is 1971, 1973. This is influenced off of ideas in cybernetics. The lead guy in this project was Stafford Beer, and he was working with some ideas related to organizational cybernetics and industrial management, and basically this was a telex network, so a pre-internet telex network set up around Argentina to help basically centralize information. So that way the people could make decisions about it. So it took in information about how many goods are being produced, like the exports, factory information. It tried to take in all the information related to the country and present it in a manageable way. Next is from Stafford Beer himself. This is like a really super cool classic video of him describing the system, and we're just going to take a look at just a moment of that discussion.
Belinda is a doctor, a medical doctor, as you may know, and therefore it was very easy to explain the model to him in terms of neurocybernetics as a way of controlling the body, and then I went into the business of controlling the state. And so I said to him, let us suppose that these elements of the state are the departments of state, like foreign affairs, the economy, home affairs, so on. And then we'll have those, and the following things will happen, and then we'll just have a system too, and I built it out on a piece of paper lying on the table between us. Then a system 3 and a system 4, and I got that far. And then I got to system 5, and I drew a big histrionic breath. And I said, I was going to say, this compañero presidente is you. Before I could say it, he suddenly smiled very broadly, and he said, system 5, at last, for people.
So that's the punchline there. Okay, so that's just some other kind of background stuff before we really get into the internet. So in the 70s, the internet's getting developed as well. In the late 60s, the ARPANET, and into the 70s, the internet is starting to form. By the 80s, it's a very robust system, and people are starting to think of CSCW and think of really using these new tools to work together in different ways. And this is a CSCW matrix. Like I said, it's a bigger, broader term about information technology and how people work together. And so it just kind of breaks up people into, well, they're here at the same time, or they're in different locations or remote locations. They're talking to each other at the same time or asynchronously at different times. And so those are some of the concepts that you can look at in there. I forgot to mention, for those of y'all with a computer already, if you go to the Code RGV Twitter, right at the top should be the slides to this presentation, so you can follow along, or you can take a look at these later on when you're at home and thinking about this presentation. Okay, so after just general concepts of CSCW, we go into electronic voting machines, and this is happening in a lot of different ways. So a few dates kind of highlighted in this passage. 1892, we're using lever voting machines, so we're using technology, and then we're using a lot more some sort of electronic device to vote towards the 90s. And we're seeing all sorts of, we're seeing punch cards, and we're seeing different sorts of systems start to develop from the 60s and whatnot. But some of the most common ones are the DRE voting machines that you see at a lot of polling places now. Quick map of some of the places where electronic voting is in use around the world. So this is not internet voting, again, it's just using technology to do the vote in some way, shape, or form. And notably, Brazil and India are two of the biggest ones using, I think, electronic voting throughout the country, and up until very recently without a paper trail. They're moving now towards a paper trail with their doing their e-voting. Internet voting, fun fact, I did not realize, but internet voting actually started in the United States in 1996 with Ross Perot. He employed internet voting for his primaries. So that was the first instance of it in the States. And it continues to the day, but in a very diminished form. There's a lot of mail-in voting that happens in different states, but then there's also been some new legislation requiring that veterans or military personnel who are overseas and other people who can't access polling places have an electronic way of accessing that. And there's some companies that are trying to get into this sort of internet voting business with the states related to that. But in general, it doesn't really happen. Switzerland, 2000 to present. The Swiss started using them locally in what they call cantons, places like Geneva. And it spread. It became popular locally, and so now they're trying to do it in more parts of the country. But it's been happening since 2000. In Canada, same story. They're doing it in municipalities and trying to move up to provinces, and that started in 2003. Estonia, as we've seen, 2005 to the present, they're full-on internet voting for 7 elections now. India, 2011 to the present, they're now starting to experiment with some internet voting. Norway basically had a run of internet voting from 2008 to 2014, at which point they just decided to discontinue it. There were different security issues, and the political will just kind of went away for internet voting in Norway. Okay, continuing on with the history of eDemocracy, Wikipedia was actually a big milestone that's referenced for a number of these folks. And it was because you could for the first time do collectively work on something, on a project. You could collectively work on an encyclopedia entry. And this led people to start thinking, well, what else can you do with it? There's a famous book called Wiki Government, How Technology Can Make Government Better, Democracy Stronger, and Citizens More Powerful. And that's written by Beth Simone Noveck, who was part of Obama's Open Initiative. She was one of the leading tech consultants for the Obama administration. Okay, social media, the development of social media itself as a thing, sort of starting to get some feet under it and legs under it by 2006. Really, it seems like it matured by about 2008 to 2010. People were using it, they knew how to use it, and there was mobiles were starting to catch up to the networking. So the access became much broader. And people who use that, Arab Spring, Occupy Iceland for how they crowdsource their constitution, and then the Twitterverse, which continues to exist and influence politics today. Do I have, is there music coming from me? Okay. All right. Okay. But Twitter is still very important these days, especially related to police accountability. It's like you can't go on Facebook anymore. Almost every week you see a new video that's come out. So the role that social media plays as it develops and as it matures gets broader and broader. At the present, this is just a quick smattering of some of the softwares. You have Erasis, which is out of Italy, LiquidFeedback, which was developed in Germany, Democracy OS, which is based out of Argentina, Lumio, which comes from Australia, New Zealand in particular, Agora Voting, which is out of Spain. This one down here, which actually translates as direct democracy, that one comes out of Sweden, I believe. And then All Our Ideas is a project by Google and the World Bank and I think Princeton or something like that. And it's a project in wiki surveys. So it's another element, another way to get feedback in a more sophisticated way. So what are some of the applications of this stuff? What do people do with this stuff? So we'll go back to 2002. There was a project called DemoX. And there's a book written about it, and sort of chronicled the story and what happened. But they sort of refer to it as a Trojan horse. And the basic idea of DemoX was we are going to, at random, choose somebody to be a representative. So at random, somebody is chosen to be the representative. Great, they're the rep. Then we are going to run this person on the promise that when they get into office, they are not going to make any decisions. They are simply going to follow what our website says, what our members say they should do. So this worked, and they started getting people into, they got one person into their local parliament, and it worked for several years. It gained in popularity. So the person would just go, sit, listen to the policy, then report back to the web page, and they were using something called Net Conference Plus at the time, but they would report back, and then they would just sort of discuss it, debate it, and say, we want this, and they just went off of, statistically, 60% of the people want this, so we're going to go with this, and that's it, cut and dry. As it developed, as it evolved, it started in local settings, and it combined with another group called eDemocracy, and it became this new group, which we recognize today, this direct democracy group, which is trying to do the same thing, but on a national level. Okay, Estonia's iVoting. So we'll go ahead and return to this, because there's some interesting results from the iVoting numbers. So they started in 2005, and they started with just local elections. And they got about a little over 9,000 voters, 2% overall of the total votes. But as you can see, it keeps going up and up and up. And these are local elections, these are national parliamentary, these are European parliamentary elections, but they're compared side by side with the sort of next phase of those. And you can see that those overall numbers keep jumping higher and higher, and the amounts of people participating with iVoting keeps on going up and up, to where in the 2014 European parliamentary elections you had 100,000 voters roughly, and it was 31% of the overall people that actually participated in the vote. Voter turnout increased. So there's the source for these stats right here for those who find the slides. But if you look at local elections here in 2005, voter turnout's 47.4. The next local election, 60.6. And then it's kind of holding strong around the 60 range. Parliamentary elections, 61. Then the next one is 63. And the next one is 64. So it's steadily going up, and that is voter turnout. So it has increased the amount of people who are participating in the electoral process. Okay, so I'm going to show you now a slightly longer video because it's really good. And for those of y'all who've been really wondering about when are we going to get into more of the technical specifics, we're going to do that right now. This guy, J. Alex Holderman, is a great speaker, a very intelligent person, but a critic in general.
On the capability. The first thing you do is go to an official website.
claiming that server is claiming that this is the ballot it received from you. Okay, at that point, using the random coins that it got from the QR code, the smartphone app can take its root source, your ballot choice. It can try each possible choice until it finds one that encrypts to the same thing. Okay, then it finds a matching one, and it displays the resulting cabinet. As a safeguard against coercion, this validation procedure can only be done up to 3 times, and it can only be done for up to 30 minutes after the ballot is passed. Otherwise, someone who wanted to coerce you could just say, show me your verification. Interestingly, as another safeguard against coercion, you have the ability to replace your vote as many times as you want up until the in-person election. So you just do the process again, and your new vote takes the place of your old vote, only the most recently cast is counted. Alright, so that's the verification process. Now, how does counting work? Counting is interesting in the Estonian system because it's basically just trying to do the cryptographic analog to the double envelope absentee ballots that are used in many countries. Basically, with a double envelope absentee ballot, you have an inner security envelope that contains your ballot. Then you have an outer envelope that contains your name and signature. When it comes time to count, they strip off your name and signature after checking that you have only voted once and you're entitled to vote. Then they separate the inner security envelope, shuffle them up so they can't be matched to the names, open them, and count the vote. Well, in the Estonian system, they're doing something very similar. So the election servers store up the votes until it's time to count. And then they take those signed encrypted ballots, strip off the signatures, and burn them onto a DVD. So they take this DVD and use it to move the encrypted ballots to a physically separated air-gapped machine called the counting server. And only the counting server has access to the private key that is used to decrypt the ballots. So they're encrypted all the way from your client to the counting server. And the counting server can decrypt them and see the votes, but it never sees the signatures that identify them. So in that way, they attempt to maintain the secrecy of the ballot. The output of the counting server is simply the election results. They're added in with in-person votes, and the winner is declared. So that's the Estonian process.
So that's the Estonian process, and he was sent in basically to hack that. He was invited in to try and tamper with it and figure out the security flaws in the system, which eventually he does. So this is a great talk. And I highly encourage watching the whole thing because it's super fascinating. And he also talks about an attempt at internet voting that happened in D.C. in 2010, which his group, his research group out of Michigan, they're based out of Michigan, was also invited to tamper with these an internet voting process in D.C., which they did as well. About a week before, they were able to get full access to their security cameras in the server room and to change up all sorts of things on the result page that you would see. So that's a description of how, more technical description of how the internet voting works in Estonia. Okay, so we're moving on now to some more applications of eDemocracy. A crowdsourced constitution between 2009 and 2012. This is the 25-member team that became the drafters of the Constitution. They were picked also at random, and eventually they interacted with people over Facebook to determine what happened. So it went in a couple of different phases. So phase one, they assembled a national forum of about 1,000 people, and they just came together for a day and asked to list off the principles and values that they'd like to see in the Icelandic Constitution. Next phase two, an assembly of 25 Constitution drafters were selected from a pool of 522 citizens that purposely excluded professional politicians. So they wanted to get from the general population. Then phase 3, they opened up social media to make comments on the drafting. And they went through 12 drafts. They used Facebook, they used Twitter, they used email and regular mail. And the crowdsourcing generated 3,600 comments for a total of 360 suggestions, including net neutrality suggestion, I think was one of the ones that came up on the internet. The resulting constitutional proposal was approved as the basis of constitution by 2/3 of the voters in a 2012 referendum, so most people wanted this. But the bill based on it ultimately stalled in the parliament. So it was ultimately still up to the sitting parliament to adopt it, and they just said no. So that is one wrinkle in the process. Another application, the German Pirate Party, which also saw a lot of success between 2009 and 2012. In the 2011 Berlin state election, they got about 9% of the vote and got 15 seats in March 2012. They got 4 seats in this local election. Again in 2012, got 6 more seats. Then in 2012, they won 20 more seats. So they were ramping up, though. They were starting in 2009, and they're using specifically LiquidFeedback, which is one of the softwares that we're going to look at here in a little bit. But the whole Pirate Party itself is also partially based on this ideology. It's really a type of political ideology that more delegates should be making decisions about policy. We should be using the information technology to open up that process. ArticleV.org. I mentioned this before, but it originated out of an InterOccupy conference call, and they created a social networking site aimed at dealing with a constitutional convention. So it was broken up into a bunch of different states and a bunch of different proposals, and the site still exists. But it isn't using any of the current softwares. It's using an Oxwall PHP backbone, and then adding in some kind of cobbling together this monster. So it has a question to answer Q&A element as well that does the polling, and then the Oxwall just creates the social network itself. But it's sort of a cobbled together site. So that sort of gets us into some of the platforms. Lumio is one of the newest platforms. It's already mobile friendly. A lot of the newer ones are aiming to be mobile friendly. And Lumio is the one that's based out of Australia, New Zealand in particular. It's a social network, again. It's set up as a mobile app. It's open source, and it provides the ability to debate and vote on proposals. In the slides here, if you get them, it has a link to their website, their GitHub for their source code, and a little video explaining some stuff about Lumio. Democracy OS. This one has gotten a lot of play because one of the members of the team was featured on a TED Talk sort of recently, and they just talked about Democracy OS as their software and as what they were trying to work on with Liquid Democracy in Argentina. So again, it's another social network set up as a mobile app. It's open source, and they're working on something called blockchain trust, which I don't quite understand it, but what I understand from it, it's sort of like a public ledger of sorts. In a Bitcoin analogy, the blockchain trust is to provide some sort of guarantee and verification of your vote, that there's a separate kind of register of the vote that happens on this blockchain. LiquidFeedback, which we've mentioned a number of times at this point, is one of the older ones. It's a social networking site, also open source, promoting the ideas of liquid democracy, debate and vote on proposals. It uses this Condorcet-Schultz method of voting, which the Schultz method is a little complicated for myself at the moment, but I'm learning about it. But it is just the method by which it determines who's winning any particular vote. It's going off of the Schultz method. And it's in wide use by the Pirate Party in Berlin. This graphic on the right-hand side just illustrates the concept of liquid democracy again. That concept being what we are doing is we are going back and forth between I want to have a say in every policy and every vote that comes before me, or I want to give that say up to somebody who I think is more experienced or more knowledgeable in any particular area. So you can sort of lump your votes in, or you can take them back at any time. But that's one of the main foundations of how they've designed the software. So this is a sort of, again, a CSCW aspect of the ideology, the ideas behind how it should work are influencing how you build the thing. And it comes out of the public software group out of Germany. Erasis, the last one that I'm going to look at right now, there's many. There's many softwares out there. White House 2, Nation Builder. We're not going to talk about the Agora voting. And you can just keep on finding more and more. So the last one we're going to look at is Erasis. It's also a social network, open source, and modular. They're trying to create their website in such a way where you can just take a chunk of it out, because like a social network, it has all this extra stuff. It's got your calendar, it's got your forum, it's got your thing for files, but they're recognizing that there's lots of different softwares that do that kind of stuff. Maybe you only want a portion of it, so they're trying to build it in a way that you can just take out that debate portion. And the way that they do their debate is sort of interesting. When you put up a proposal and it goes to debate, it anonymizes everyone in the debate. So it's a psychological element. It's trying to take away this notion of, well, this person really knows what they're talking about, or is like a very popular person, and so we're trying to mitigate the psychological effects of that by anonymizing people and just sticking with the content of what they're saying, as opposed to their person. It also uses the Schultz method for determining the outcomes of those votes. And again, we have the web page and the GitHub down there at the bottom. I'd like to show a short video from Erasis that sort of explains it, as well as most of the other softwares in this ecosystem. Hold on. There we go.
Imagine what it would be like to have an idea that would make a difference to your community or your company, maybe even to your city or your country.
But it can take days, even weeks or months, to convince people to support your idea. That's not the end of it. Think of the challenges you might face getting your great idea approved by the decision makers. All these barriers can get in the way of turning a great idea into a practical solution that we learned in the internet age. And the world is ready for an online democracy platform. The world is ready for Erasis, an innovative global web application that allows the best and precious ideas, as well as the finest and most innovative solutions to any problem, local or global, to be asked at large. Every community can create their own proposals or participate in voting for the world they want. Join us and start by creating your own group now, and let's choose our own future together.
Right. So that's the general idea. There's always the element of adoption of any of these ideas, but it allows for in-house management and logistics. You can use this for any group. If you have a Tech Tuesdays group or a Code RGV group, for instance, and they wanted to, as a community, as a group of people, decide how do we want to move forward as a group. You can create your own little group, and then you can have proposals that are debated on as to, like, okay, we should have a fundraiser on Monday for this, or we should start doing trainings on Python on Sundays or whatever. So you can put those up, and then you can debate it out, try and figure things out, and move together as a group. Some key people. Now that we've talked about some of the projects and softwares, just kind of want to refresh and go over some of the key people involved. Brigitte Jonsdottir, she was a member of the Icelandic Parliament and the Icelandic Pirate Party. She's very outspoken internet activist, and she was involved with the crowdsourcing of that Constitution between 2010 2012. There's a little video for her as well. It's a little additional information. Smari McCarthy, more on the development end in Iceland, and so he is an information activist, and he co-founded the Pirate Party along with Brigida and a few other folks. There's a video down here called Crowdsourcing the Constitution, Lessons from Iceland. So this is post 2012. Smari just talking about how things went, what were some of the obstacles to the process in general. Pia Mancini, she had the TED Talk explaining Democracy OS. So she's an activist in Argentina, and she's one of the co-founders of Democracy OS, and you can find her online just as a big promoter, and also one of the founders of the Net Party, another sort of similar to the Pirate Party parties. Andreas Nietzsche, he was one of the co-writers of LiquidFeedback, so he's one of the architects for the LiquidFeedback system out of Germany. And this is a video of him just describing LiquidFeedback as a program, what it does. Tarvi Martins, he's basically the architect of the Estonian voting system. It's his baby. And there's not a whole lot about Tarvi in English, but there is this small video about IT in Estonia that he comes out in with some of the other designers. Pietro, Peter, he is more based out of Italy, so he was very involved with the 5-star movement. And he's a mathematician and software developer. And he has a great video on the history of eDemocracy, which I used portions of to kind of fill out some of the story. But he's a great mind and a great activist in this regard. Beppe Grillo, kind of have to mention him. He's not on the software end. He's more on the public relations end. He used to be a comedian, a very popular comedian in Italy, and he was the face of the 5-star movement. His blog is still one of the most popular blogs, but I saw an article recently describing traffic on blogs, and his blog was between I Can Has Cheeseburger and Gawker. So fairly popular blogs. So they were using that to run up to their parliamentary elections, and I forget which year, but they got about a third of the seats filled by their party, and they did that because he leveraged his popularity, and then worked with engineers and developers to work on an online platform to get people into the parliament. So he becomes a very important person in the overall story. Alessandro Rodi is the lead developer of the Oasis software. And they're a 12-team team based out of Italy, but he's lead developer there. And then Beth Simone Noveck, which we talked about earlier. She was author of the Wiki Government and the United States Deputy Chief Technology Officer for Open Government that led President Obama's Open Government Initiative in 2009. And she's currently a commissioner for the Global Commission on Internet Governance. But she's still a very active person in issues related to internet and e-governance. J. Alex Halderman, which we saw the video of him earlier, and this is just another link to that same video. But he has been interested in electronic voting and securities for a long time. So you can't sort of ignore him in the bigger picture either. Wrapping up, politics is a large system. So it's not just these softwares that can change the way things go. There's socioeconomic issues, there's issues of education, there's media, there's public debate, there's the ideology and the inertia of wanting to change any system that's already in place that's working more or less, the fluctuations of public opinion, and then the concept of omnicompetent citizens, which Liquid Democracy sort of addresses, which is an old critique from the 50s, from Walter Lippmann, basically saying democracy is impossible because you can't have all of these people knowledgeable in the same way. People specialize, And so the concept that they can all kind of come together and vote in a fair way in a democracy is out of the question. There's also issues of journalism ethics. People protect their sources, so there's this pocket of people that know the full story. They should be entrusted with the vote. So another ideological component, and you know the point being that there are softwares that are maturing and that are offering now the ability to think about representative government and government in general in a different way. You can start to get away from representatives and you can start to move towards delegates determining policy locally and nationally because of the use of information technology. But it's one part of the puzzle. There's still how people are informed through the news. There's still what they know about, what they're allowed to know about from official channels. All of these play a role in how people vote and what guides public opinion. And that's it. That's my presentation. I don't know if there's any other questions. I'm gonna have to turn this thing off because my battery is dying here. But no, I'm good. I'm just gonna close it. So, yeah, does anybody have any questions on anything that I went over, or any comments, any disagreements, any funny jokes? Oma? Yeah. Yeah. So one of the elements, one of the tensions involved in internet voting is this notion that we have to keep the ballot secret, and so to prevent coercion, those sorts of things. So these ideals that we have built in and are used to within what we expect from a fair election have to cash out in your technology. If your technology can't deliver that, then you have that room to say it's not safe. There's a problem there. I could potentially, you could potentially go in and change votes, or you could potentially go in and coerce people. So that's the tensions that are always existing with these technologies. So that's what's happening in Norway, is that they felt it was unsafe over time. And then the other element is that it sort of starts to open Pandora's box a little bit, because once you start allowing internet voting, it's just one other step away to start allowing people to vote on all kinds of things that the Congress normally does. All kinds of things that the Senate normally does. So I think that there's certainly some hesitation to do that, because it would fundamentally change how our Constitution says we do stuff in certain countries. Why Ross Perot's voting went away, I'm not sure. I've just learned that fun fact that he did it. But yeah, I mean, it was news to me too. But it was '96. It was still an early time, a very young and innocent time in eDemocracy and internet voting. So I guess nobody really thought too much of it. But yeah, it just has not gained any kind of traction otherwise in the States. Right. That he has some skin in the game on that one. he had possibly some money to make off of promoting that. Yeah, yeah. But I mean, he was also trying to be new, and innovative. So that was a new technology at the time, and so might as well use it. Any other questions, Marlon? Okay. Well, I mean, it depends on how skilled you are. So Halderman was able to hack into the DC internet voting system fairly quickly because of his sophisticated knowledge of coding. When he explains how he did it, he realized that there was one line in the code that had quotation marks instead of a single quotation, and so that allowed him entire access to the whole thing, to the security cameras, to changing the votes altogether, and to putting the marching music theme song of the rival of like the Michigan something or other, like as your splash page at the end, being like, okay, you did it. So one minor mistake in the code was able to grant entire access to the system, but you got to know that. You got to know that enough. So how easy is it to hack into these things? Really, really hard for somebody like me, or maybe yourself. But for others, it could be kind of easy, and that's the tension, is trying to, and that's for everything, right? That's for your banking transactions. That's for your tax when you submit your taxes over the internet. That's for all of those things. Yeah, I want to say DC again is one of these that's trying out a software like this that is a policy sort of like, we're going to look at it, you're going to give you a chance to weigh in kind of thing. I want to say a city in San Francisco, or a city in California, I think it's San Francisco, that's also doing it. There's on the websites of these different programs, you see their partnerships. And so there are some reps and council members that are trying to start using this a little bit here and there, just for extra input. Erasis in Tuscany, the Tuscany region was looking for software to do exactly that. And so Erasis won the bid to do that in Tuscany. So they're trying to do this modular thing where they take out a portion of the software just to debate and suggest proposals for citizens in Tuscany. So that's happening in Europe, in the States, here and there a little bit. Well, it just goes from activism and a problem, like that was basically, that's a lot of my learning, is when I run into a problem, then I try and figure out, what I can do about it. So the Occupy presented an immediate problem with these huge general assemblies that were trying to work together in some way, but it was impossible. And so immediately we're trying to look for alternatives. And then as we started going down that road and talking with other people, then the concepts got bigger. Then we, get informed about Iceland. Iceland is going on at the same time, and then we're kind of catching up and learning about that sort of stuff. So my involvement with politics in 2011 is what informed me and gave me the reason, the problem to try and move forward. And in general, I think it's a very interesting and innovative way to use technology to rethink democracy in general. All together. Yes, sir. What's it called again? Uh-huh. Last episode. Very nice. Yeah, I'll look that up. And you said something Burke? Okay. And yeah, and then addressing the first thing that you mentioned, a lot of the trajectories on the groups working on this are doing just that thing that you suggested in terms of forming another party. The Pirate Party or the Net Party are these parties that are trying to build up, but they sort of had a peak. 2012 basically was sort of a peak, and let's. Well, I mean, occupies a different can of worms because that it was a physical location, and so once you once you outlaw the assemblies in these physical locations, then you can no longer have camps. But Occupy still exists in the network form. The network never went away. I see posts from folks who try to basically we're trying to leverage our social media muscle together because. Like I said, there's a lot of ins and outs of that because the EdgeRank algorithm was really significant in 2012 for social media. It just killed a lot of reach and that sort of thing. But going back to what you're talking about, the 2012 peak, things like the Pirate Party in Germany and what was happening in Iceland, they sort of crescendoed there. And Peter from Italy, Pietro, gives an analogy of I want to say it's the Gartner hype cycle of adoptions of technologies. And so he sort of thinks that it was on that overinflated kind of moment in 2011, 2012, and it's inevitably going to take this sort of backwards fall until the systems mature, and then you can kind of reach a more stable plateau. Yeah. Just those two? Okay. So related to the issues of do I know if I've given my vote away and does that person know that I have it? In Liquid Democracy, absolutely. I mean, that's the way that they built it. So in Liquid Democracy, there's certainly a tally because then the website has to know your weight, basically, how much weight your vote is. And so it is only an option. It is only an option to give away your vote. It is only an option to say, oh, basically, I don't care about this election or I don't want to deal with it. I don't understand this issue. I'm going to let you figure that out. You can vote for me. That's cool. But at any time, I can take that back. I can say, you know what, you just said something after I said that, which upset me about you. I'm going to take my vote back. You can do that at any moment in the software. In terms of the digital divide question, internet voting does not replace voting. It only allows, especially the deliberation aspects, it only allows more access. So just like what they did in Iceland with the Constitution, you would also want physical ways to put in your ideas. You'd want there to be also a meeting that happens where you can come to it and you can discuss it, or you can write a letter or something like that and send it to somebody so that way it's part of the process. But the digital divide is always an issue. I feel like it's getting to be less and less and less of an issue with the proliferation of mobile devices in particular. That everyone, not everyone, but so many people are now have access to mobile devices, which is why it's so important to make these softwares mobile friendly, I think, which is why the newer ones, Lumio and Democracy OS, are already built like that. But you want input at any point if a person does not have access to technology, or if they do. This is just an idea to broaden access. Any other questions?